Today is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Like most Canadians, I had no idea of what the history of the Indigenous peoples of Canada was or current situation. And I am amazed and saddened by the stories of the residential schools and the subjugation and cultural attempt, well, I should say, a failed attempt to destroy their culture by the dominant physical power of the federal government of Canada and the local provincial governments. I was deeply disturbed and felt quite ill at one point reading about the stories of these young children snatched from their parents and from their language, from their culture, from their village, from their friends, and placed in a school where punishment was arbitrary, where sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse were used as tools to control and manage children, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, until they were sent back to their communities as disfigured, destroyed, emotionally unstable, absolutely, to be honest, even doing this podcast, the amount of research that I did for it has just sickened me at my core. I love my children, and while my own parents were not great parents in the perfect model, they were good parents. They were basically loving. I always had food, clothing, treated well. My day-to-day life was not full of corporal punishment or sexual threats or being hit. It was pretty good. When I experienced reading what the life of the children that were sent to residential schools, part of me is absolutely outraged, and part of me feels sick as I read it, to know that Canadians did it, that these people did these things. So, I'm always curious, and I looked at what was done and how it was done. And then I noticed a pattern of human behavior, of subjugation, the subjugation of those who are different race, different color, different language. They could be the same race but a different language. And sadly, my research just shows the awful truth about human beings. Professor George Santayana, and in original form, said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Now, it's been used by many people since, and it always comes out, if you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. But he also said so much more. According to Santayana's philosophy, history repeats. History repeats. The cycle repeats. The phrasing itself is certainly catchy. It's a big one, because not only is it so common, but it also because it's true, and if history is driven by human nature, it is ugly. Then this saying ought to guide our public and private policy. I offer no forgiveness to those who did these acts. I offer no excuse to the Indigenous population of Canada. What happened is dreadful. In the broader perspective, what I've discovered is when a more advanced, either technologically or advanced in warfare or of bigger numbers, comes across another population, they typically enslave it, destroy it, try to turn them over into or make them like themselves. In retrospect, perhaps it would have been easier to just truly declare war and kill your opponent, because the mess and the harm that people do with things like residential schools or re-education, as it is called in Russia, and cultural education, as it's called in China. I mean, I don't care which country you pick. They all have done it, and some countries today are still doing it. I am saddened by that. So that's my curious part of it. I'm actually going to do a written piece about this because I've got too much information to put into this podcast. So the Indigenous people of Canada, all of you, you deserve a day of truth and I am so upset. Reconciliation. Yes. Now, I, myself, personally, never did any of these acts, but that doesn't absolve me from living in a country that took advantage of these people, both physically and financially, and in the destruction of their culture. People's culture make them who they are. They give us a sense of reference of who we are and how the world is shaped. The largest thing I can see in this pattern of behavior everywhere, but specifically in Canada, was in the schools themselves, was to bring Christianity to the Indigenous people, teach them to fit in by teaching them Christian ways. That's really sad. That a religion that is originally based upon love and compassion created such harm, such terrible harm. So here it is. Somewhere between Jesus' appearance and his writings, men took over, and then behavior that wasn't Christian eventually became the work of the devil. What was behind potlatches being stopped was that it gave Indigenous people a chance to be together and create community, but that it was spirit-based, satanic. It was an evil thing. I mean, that's just crazy. In my modern mind, it is just crazy. How can you think that of something that would bring so much community together and even out the wealth of a village, of a nation? It's just, I just don't understand. And that's part of the problem, that as a modern Canadian, I do not understand. I don't have the feelings and the experiences or even the exposure to truly understand. But to the Aboriginal peoples of this country, to the First Nations of this country, I will learn. I will learn about you, and I will acknowledge you. Can I change the past? No. That's the one thing that all of us have to recognize, that there's no possible way to change the past. Am I guilty for the past? Well, guilt is a funny thing because that's not useful. Can I have compassion for what they did in 1886? No, I wasn't here, and neither were the people I am talking to. So here we have it. How do we handle it? How do we behave amongst the peoples that have been oppressed and taken over by our own nations? The book Caste, which is about the Negro slavery or black slavery and control of them for economic benefit, is an awful story on the same scale and a greater scale because of their sheer numbers. So, my dear Canadians, my dear Americans, look at the history of, read the book Caste, read the subject matter that what Canadians did. You know, here's an interesting fact. A man named Hector Louis Langevin, who was also a founding father of Canada, helped to establish residential schools in his role as the Minister of Public Works. He copied the US model, and in 1883, Langevin promised a pilot project to the House of Commons, which would consist of building 3 residential schools in the Northwest Territories. That plan and that idea, based upon that knowledge, just flooded Canada with these residential schools. The fact that they were maintained, taught by mostly religious orders, sisters, nuns, teachers, fathers of Christian denominations, that truly has blown my mind, that such cruelty could be done by such people to another human being. I've always thought that I don't know someone until I walk in their shoes. In other words, until I get to know them. And I had never gotten to know an Indigenous people, or as they were called when I arrived in Canada in '66, I was told, don't bother with the Indians because they're just drunk and stupid. Sadly, I now know why they were a broken people, but I never challenged it, so I am guilty of never taking my own look. I challenge you, my listeners, to take a look at your own ideas and your own beliefs about anybody that is different from you. The Japanese internments, both in Canada and the United States, the oppression of the black people, slavery. And slavery existed in Canada too, except we had politer words for it. Because Indigenous school children were expected to work to get food. They had to contribute to their upkeep. No, they didn't get paid. They had no freedom. They were sexually abused. They were punished physically on a regular basis. Now, that sounds like slavery to me. I don't know what to say except to acknowledge today is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So I'm telling my truth. This is not necessarily something you need to believe or need to get upset about. This is just my experience of it. And it comes as a result of those small bodies being found buried in the ground of residential schools. I can't help but think of and experience the fact that those might have been one of my children, or it could have been me, that they were beaten and died, or they were denied health treatment and died, that they were sexually abused and died. And then there are stories of where there's no bodies, where a priest and a nun has been seen throwing a small body into a furnace. What the hell were they hiding? And may they reside in hell for the actions that they did. I don't often believe in retribution that hurts someone because it never really solves the problem. It never gets at the root cause of what is wrong and why it happened and how can we change it. But it is, I must say, I wish all those teachers and all of those administrators, I do, if there is a hell, that they go to it. It doesn't make me feel better, but that's my emotion as I'm talking about this. So for this day, for National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I'm going to reread the book Caste. Have a look for it. Just type in Caste, C-A-S-T-E. So, what will you do to improve your education and understanding of people who are different from you? Will you go up and talk to someone who is different from you? Will you, instead of being upset that you hear a foreign language and worry they might be talking about you, they might be talking about how difficult it is to be in your country when they've lost their own. Oh, by the way, I know I've been saying the book Caste, but it's written by Isabel Wilkinson. Isabel Wilkinson. So this has been my contribution to National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I pledge to keep doing what I'm doing, building and strengthening the fabric of goodwill, and challenging those around me to take a look and to understand that regardless of color of skin, accent in the voice, language structure, inside we are all the same. May I wish you love and peace, Jeffrey.